It's fine, I think so.
Shirley, Haley, can Ray, Dijon, Martin. Shirley, so you go first. In the same order now, we speak 5 to 7 minutes.
Not even that much. Yeah.
5 minutes, and then the discussion.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got it? Yeah. And then
What time, when do you want us to start?
where is the report? Can I hang on to it? Oh, you want to go?
Tell me that. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's just something you want to get.
I wasn't going to.
John, okay.
I was going to.
Born in Cuba. All right.
That's gives me a little bit more.
I just want to know. Is it Haiti since 71?
I don't know.
Shirley.
I think you should do it. All the
Shirley, you were born in Haiti, is it?
Born in Haiti, raised in Dorchester.
You gonna start?
Get ready, just a minute, right here.
Oh, I'm ready.
You all ready? Okay.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, I was told to say. A very pleasant welcome on behalf of Oxfam and Harvard University. This forum this evening on assessing the future of Haiti. This evening, my name is Sullivan Kajo, and I am the chair of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. This evening, you will hear about 5 or 4 persons speaking about the future of Haiti, what those who went in delegation, what they saw, and what assessments to make. Just a few words for the audience. Each panelist will speak for approximately 5 minutes, after which there would be questions. There is, I suspect, in your desk a white button, so that, of course, when you get to have to ask your questions, all you have to do is push the button once you get the right away from me. Since this is being recorded, we'd like you to identify yourself before you speak so we know who's speaking, student, non-student, whatever. And, of course, we would ask you to ask questions rather than make statements, so that what we have is discourse and dialogue rather than statement posed and made, etc. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this forum. And I would first of all ask Shirley David. She is a member of the Haitians Communication Project. She's born in Haiti, and she would speak for 5 minutes about her impressions of Haiti.
Okay. Again, my name is Shirley David, and I work with the Haiti Communication Project. And basically what we do is we try to correct the misinformation that gets printed in newspapers. I was the only Haitian that went down to Haiti with the delegates, and basically the Haiti that I saw, or when I left Haiti, was not the Haiti that I saw. And I just want to stress how the infrastructure and the pollution that are just intolerable in Haiti. And no one can really, comprehend as to what I'm saying unless you yourself see it. And basically, the key message that the delegates, when we went down there, was that we wanted to find out what role the United States was playing in Haiti, and as far as whether we had President Clinton, Ambassador Bill Swing, and support of Haiti. We met with Ambassador Bill Swing, and he did say he had unequivocal support of President Aristide. And then we met with key members from Immigration, DEA, and USAID, where we got a different answer. And basically, we got mixed messages. I met with DEA, and we got information that the DEA was working with the military, giving information to, and they were not recognizing the Maxwell government. So right now, we have, President Clinton, who is working with President Aristide, and you have another branch of the U.S. government, working with the military, and that's where we get conflicting roles. I'm pretty sure the other day I read an article where it says the embargo was hurting many of the children, and that there were about 3,000 children dying every month. And I, for myself, who's Haitian, I was asking the question that if there's 3,000 children dying every month since the coup, obviously there's no Haitians left in Haiti. And I don't know where the Harvard report had, well, they did the report in my side, and I felt that the report was inconsistent because it was a report done in one city, not the overall of Haiti, but I won't get into that. And also what I wanted to add is that to that report that there's been several reports. One was that in 1970, there was about 1% of 171 children that are dying in Haiti since 1970. So when you get, you know, these distorted facts, you know, what I basically want, especially the American media, to do is start to question it, not to believe that, you know, these are facts, because when you start believing that these are facts, and then we work on our end and try to say, well, Haiti is this and that, then we run into a lot of problems, because when you have, you know, Senator Dole and Helms and saying, you know, Haiti is this and Haiti is that, that it runs into a lot of problems, and basically our job become much tougher. And, you know, going through Haiti and seeing how the children and the other peasants are living, I just want to stress the embargo is not hurting the people. We are asking for a full commercial embargo. It is not hurting the peasants. The only people that are screaming against the embargo is the elite, because they're the one that have to get their resource outside of Haiti. And again, you know, we are asking for a full commercial embargo, and if you ask everyone in Haiti who is working with, to restore democracy, they will say they do want full commercial embargo. And that's it.
Okay, you'll have a chance to ask about some of these misconceptions and find out what the role of the president is vis-a-vis the State Department. You'd certainly have a chance to find out whether who's been hurt, whether the peasants or the elite, when we have a chance to ask questions. The second speaker, Raymond Dooley, sorry about that, sorry. Our second speaker is John Hancock. He's the executive director of Oxfam America. He was born in Cuba and began visiting Haiti since 1971. He too will tell us about his impressions about Haiti, and again, you'd also have a chance to ask him questions when we are all finished.
Thank you very much. I've been with Oxfam for 9 years. I have visited Somalia and I visited Mozambique. In 1985, I was in Ethiopia. A week and a half ago, I was in Port-au-Prince. And I've got to tell you that just from a personal point of view, I don't think I've been as disturbed personally by any visit in my whole life as I was on this visit. What's happening in Port-au-Prince, and I imagine in the rest of Haiti, is a living hell. The level of repression in Haiti is almost unbelievable. Every night, we were lucky enough to go to sleep in a very nice place, but every night we heard bullets, and one night heard bullets and somebody screaming at the end of the bullets. This is no joke, what's happening in Port-au-Prince. People are dying. We talked to a project partner of Oxfam's, and one of the things they said is that on October 7th, a bunch of thugs came into the house of one of the leaders of this organization, dragged him out of the house, beat him up, and then killed him, and left him there. And then when they had dragged him out of the house, he had been holding his baby. They threw the baby aside. And that's just one act. But every night, people are shot in Port-au-Prince, and the bodies are picked up in the morning. The reign of terror in Haiti is absolutely incredible. So, for example, when we were able to go down on October 30th and have a prayer service outside of the Sacré-Cœur Church, we were the only pro-democracy manifestation or demonstration in the whole country, or at least in Port-au-Prince. And that isn't because the people of Haiti are against democracy. It's because the level of repression and fear is so high that people do not feel that they can do anything, especially Haitians. We as North Americans and people from the outside could get away with it. A truckload of soldiers arrived right after we had left. But the people of Haiti can't do it because the soldiers don't arrive after they do these things. They arrive during, while it's happening. So then you have to ask yourself, what is the future of Haiti? I've been going to Haiti since 1971, and the poor of Haiti have always, always, always been on the bottom. Haiti is the poorest country of this hemisphere and one of the poorest countries in the world. And that is not, I don't think, for any other reason but the fact that the people in power have kept the level of oppression and repression so high in Haiti that that is what's happened. It seems to me that right now we have to make a fundamental choice. Do we, as a country, continue to support a system of government which ultimately will continue to lead to the repression and oppression of the poor? And there are many ways we can do that, through compromises, by having us another force take over and Cedras coming to the background. There are many ways that that could be accomplished. And yet the bottom line would be that the poor would stay poor, the resources of Haiti would continue to be depleted, and development would just not take place for the next 20 to 30 years. Or we can say that democracy has got to triumph at this time. And in order to do that, we may have to take positions which normally we may not take. For example, a full commercial embargo on Haiti will undoubtedly lead to problems among the poor. No doubt about it. The poor will suffer with an increased embargo. But the question is, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to put up with short-term pain in order to have long-term development? And that is a question that has to be asked and has to be answered, I think, in the affirmative. Oxfam America has felt that at this time, for the reasons I've just outlined, it is important for us not to withdraw the embargo, but rather to tighten it, in order for there to be the political change necessary to help the poor of Haiti. It's also very important that while we tighten that embargo, that the United Nations have a humanitarian exemption to that embargo and be allowed to have food, medicine delivered to the people of Haiti. That is absolutely crucial as a corollary to increasing the commercial embargo on Haiti. After the return of democracy, the future of Haiti will not, at that point, be determined, but rather the next year or two after that will be crucial for the future of Haiti. I'm very concerned that the World Bank, the IMF, and USAID are standing on the sidelines with a lot of money to pump and pour into Haiti. And I have to ask myself the question, how will that money be spent? And for once, will the poor be asked how that money will be spent, or will it be spent in traditional development projects which do not help poor people, but which continue to help the elite? And I would therefore, and I am, and Oxfam is, trying to advocate with USAID and with the World Bank and others, so that if in fact democracy is reinstated in Haiti, that the funds not go to traditional development projects from the top down, but that in fact poor people are asked how these funds can help them over the long term to build the kind of society in Haiti which will take Haiti out of the poorest category of nations in the world. I've got to tell you in closing that I don't think I've ever been as depressed, actually, as I was when I left Haiti. And this last week, I've continued to be depressed because it seems to me that there are a lot of forces out here that are trying to break the resolve of the United States to bring back democracy in Haiti. And that would be a tragedy for the people of that country. And I hope and I pray that in fact we keep the long-term view in mind and realize that for long-term development in Haiti, we need to take the actions that will help to bring about democracy now and long-term development in the future. Thank you.
Perhaps one may want to ask the question, if there's such repression, how do the democratic and progressive forces react? And do we, in fact, impose democracy on the country? I suspect the second question might be when one talks about the pain in the short term, that we must bear the question of who this we is. The next speaker is Decima Williams, and she's asked me to introduce her simply as a professor from Brandeis University. Decima Williams.
Thank you. I served as the co-chair for the delegation here in Boston, and with 16 others went to Haiti for a total of about 4 or 5 days. The New York Times, in its article, in its editorial on the 7th of November, had this to say, and I quote, "The cost of hesitating now in Haiti may be a future choice reduced to 2 stark and more damaging alternatives: sending in some kind of international military force or ignominiously walking away." End of quote. And this is in response to the failure to restore President Aristide to office on October 30th. I think the initiative which brought us to Haiti seeks a third alternative: neither military force, neither abandonment. We called ourselves an observer delegation interested in the pursuit of citizen diplomacy. And we took our mandate, so to speak, from a number of international and moral, national, political, and moral commitments. We relied very much on the belief in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all citizens of the world have the right to decent life and a well-being, and that we could, in fact, be part and parcel of that objective. The delegation spent 4 days, 5 days in some cases, traveling around, having meetings with the major actors and ordinary citizens. And we have compiled our findings in a report which will be released on Monday. What I'd like to do is to highlight for you what some of our findings were and what our recommendations are. I would also like to introduce 3 other members of the delegation who are here. Basile Jean-Baptiste, who chairs the group, Basile. Next to him is Lena Downey, who is a member of the delegation also, an Irish worker, Lena. Tom Reeves, who is an academic at Roxbury Community College. And I think we have a 4th person here, Ellen Israel. Did I see Ellen come in? There is Ellen, who is a practitioner, midwife in the Boston University system. As John and Shirley have said, it really was a very profound experience. In many different ways. I think for me, one of the most frightening things was to be on the top of a building and hearing gunshots all night. I mean, that was just astounding. But I think just to see the state of the country, to go to the Caribbean, which is where I am from, and to see the level of chaos in the society, the social infrastructure, the level of fear, the sense of not being safe or not being certain, that was very disorienting for me. But there were other currents as well. We met, for example, with, starting from the top, we met with the Prime Minister of Haiti, who is, I think he's a Lebanese or Jewish Haitian. Doesn't look like me, doesn't look like the average 85% Haitian who are African in their origin. And a very dynamic and committed public servant now, a businessman, a very hardworking committed Haitian. And then we met with representatives of about 14 popular organizations, peasant organizations, urban organizations. And that's the breadth of the scope of the persons with whom we met. In between, there were churchmen, clergy, people, youth, women and intellectuals and journalists and so on. And altogether, they've made up the pro-democracy sector. We did not speak with any anti-democracy people, so we can't speak about their interests and their positions, but our attempt was to look at the breadth of those who constitute the support of what we call the Restoration or the Lavalas movement. And Prime Minister Malval said to us on the very first day, when he was asked, well, what should we say to the US public when we return? And he said a number of things, two of which stand out in my mind. First, he said, tell the US public that Aristide is our Nelson Mandela, you know, and he is the only person that we want to govern this country. Prime Minister Malval also said, he said, President Aristide is the only person that Haiti needs at this hour, because, he said, Aristide will meet the needs of the poor and calm the fears of the rich. And in that, one could see the attempt to forge a national political, economic, cultural unity to govern Haiti, and I thought that was important in our understanding. So in summary, our findings have been about six major categories. First of all, we were told in no uncertain terms that President Aristide must return. But not only must he return, but he must have adequate security and maneuverability when he returns. So he's not in a straitjacket. And that he should also be given by the international community the kinds of economic assistance necessary to make a success of his administration. I serve on the board of Oxfam America with John, and I agree entirely that the kind of programs that AID needs to pursue would be the ones that would allow for a transition of economic power in an otherwise impoverished society. A second finding we had was that the political and economic conditions in the country are deplorable for the vast majority of Haitians. And very often we are told that Haiti is a basket case. The literature, the media speak of the country that way. Here I want to borrow from an African-American activist in New Jersey who says that it pays to be poor, but it doesn't pay the poor. You know, and I think that's the case with Haiti. If it is a basket case, it's been made a basket case by those both inside the country and outside, the corporate elites, the uncaring development programs, which drain the resources not only of Haiti but of the entire Caribbean in a way that impoverishes continuously. So that if Haiti is a basket case, as I'm repeating, it is the result of specific development or underdevelopment programs that have been ongoing. Our third finding is that despite official support, the United States is sending mixed signals about Haiti. While we were there, the US ambassador said in very unequivocal terms, and we've heard that repeated from the White House, that President Clinton stands firmly with President Aristide and for his restoration. Nevertheless, while we were there, in the hotel, we saw some of the what is called the second government under Oliver North. His individuals, people like Kevin Cattle, who was an operative in the invasion of Grenada, they were there again in the hotels in Haiti, conducting business with the right wing. And this has since come out in the media. But we were there. We saw them in operation, beefing up the military. that there are really two, at least two, and perhaps more than two policies ongoing. And those with whom we speak, particularly government officials and intellectuals, stress the need for one policy. And if there is one policy, then it has to be in the direction of supporting the program of President Aristide. Now, our fourth discovery was that while most Haitians believe that the United Nations stands behind the Governor's Island Accord, they felt that it had very little power. And we've seen that played out in the last week when, in fact, following the failure of October 30th to generate a resolution to the crisis, the United Nations reconvened a series of meetings, and the military did not attend. And there is no mechanism for bringing them to the table. And in general, the fact that the monitors have gone to the Dominican Republic, the United Nations and the OAS monitors have left the country, and there really isn't a mechanism to effect the force of the international community inside Haiti. Our fifth finding was that the Malval administration, despite its functioning, is doing so in the face of tremendous adversity. Here is a cabinet of a legitimate government held out in a villa. They can't go to their offices. We were very fortunate to have this meeting, but we ourselves were interrupting a cabinet meeting in somebody's residence. That's not the normal functioning of government. And our sixth and final finding, which is a very inspiring and important one, really came from the fact that we found grassroots pro-democracy organizations were continuing to work. We spoke specifically in the first instance with representatives of MPP, 4 of them who came, including one woman. We were very pleased that the women's leadership had not yet crumbled in the face of the crisis. And they said, in fact, that though they could not continue the full scale of the rural development programs that they had been engaged in the past, at a much lower level, they were still planting trees. That the project of the creolization of the pig farming project, this was ongoing. Then on another day, we met with a group of 9 individuals representing 14 organizations, and they informed us that part of their initiative to maintain the political democratic profile was to have a network, a coalition building among themselves. So I think the news that we bring back is to say that if we are to think about the future of Haiti, we have to do so looking at two fronts. The first one being that inside Haiti itself, there is a movement, there is a will, and there is a machinery for the restoration of a process that is much more just and much more democratic than you have had in the past. And on the external, that there is a need for a policy that is not military, that is not without sympathy, but one that really supports the initiatives of the Haitian government and the people themselves, and that there's a lot more maneuverability in the Clinton's program for achieving that.
Okay, thank you very much, Decima. Raymond Dooley hasn't arrived yet. I suspect if he does arrive, or when he does arrive, he'll join us here and you could also ask him questions. Just two brief bits of things to remember as we begin the discussion. One, there is a white button there which you're going to push. When you want to ask a question, you push the white button. Make sure the white button stays in while you ask your question. And secondly, no statements, or keep the statements if there must be statements. It's very, very short. And thirdly, I would identify anybody who wishes to speak. So the floor is open for a discussion for perhaps the next probably 20, 30 minutes as the time as it goes along. Also, please identify yourself, since of course it's being taped. Oh, I see my brother.
I guess I could just speak like this. My name is Carlos Whiteman. I'm a third-year student at the college. I was wondering, what are the prospects for a revolutionary situation in Haiti, keeping in mind that the military consists of 7,000 members, and there seems, as Decima Williams has pointed out, that there is a pro-democracy movement going on in Haiti from the bottom, from the mass of the people. What are the prospects for a revolutionary situation arising in Haiti where the bottom, the masses, sort of assume control of the country and sort of dethrone the military leadership in a sense?
I'm sure military expert here will answer.
Do you want to?
Yeah, there's a revolutionary situation ongoing in Haiti. Shirley,
There is resistance in Haiti. Most people think that, and the 7,000, that number is a little bit outrageous. The Haitian military, we have like several military, we got the FRAP, we got the Zengandos, and we have the attachés. And basically, the Haitian military is under a hierarchical system. When Cédras and Michel Francois leave, once those two key leaders leave, the Haitian military collapses right there and then. They will not know what to do. They will not know who to get their orders from. And as far as a revolutionary, there is a resistance going in Haiti. Right now, it is under hiding. And right now, we are trying to get funding to have that resistance to keep going. And because that most people cannot go outside is because that these attachés, they have Uzis and they're going around, terroring the peasants in the countryside and in the city. But it is going. And as far as a revolution, I don't think that, revolution is such like a strong word, but I don't want to say that we're not doing anything in Haiti as of yet. And once we hear anything of President Aristide, then the Haitian people, they will react. So right now, we're just waiting as to what is the next step for President Aristide.
John, you wanted to?
Well, I just might refer to history. I mean, in terms of just a couple of years ago, the Haitian people were instrumental in terms of getting the government of Baby Doc out of power, and there was a mobilization of people at that point. I think you also, so I absolutely agree with Shirley. At the same time, you have to realize that one of the things that I was struck by when I was in Haiti this time, because I've been there a number of times in the 80s, is the much higher level of weapons. I mean, the sophistication of weapons on the street is much higher now than it was 10 years ago. It used to be 10 years ago there was weapons, and Duvalier had weapons, but they were really old. But now you've got submachine guns, you've got Uzis, you've got some major weapons that are running around that are just there in the city and with these attachés. And I think that the longer this goes on, the more the FRAP is organizing, the more the opposition is organizing, the more the military embargo is not working particularly well. And I think the longer this goes on, the more they're going to be organized and the more militarily they're going to be organized. And I think that's one of the concerns.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Rati Harjono, Neiman Fellow from Indonesia. Am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Oh, we are hearing you, yes.
I have two questions. First, I wonder if you could explain the difference between the attachés and the frappés, the different security forces within Haiti. Secondly, how are you going to get the military with the weapons, with the guns, with the bullets, to agree to some kind of surrender? Obviously, economic sanction is taking a long time.
Well, perhaps, Shirley, you do the attaché thing, and then we perhaps ask Decima to do the other thing. The difference between the attachés and the frappés.
Basically, the FRAP, they are not military people. They are just men, I would say ranges age between 18 to, let's say, 30. And basically, they've been taken into the military, but they are not military officials, and they've been given certain favors, whether it is protection or money or commodities. We don't know as of yet what persuades them to go ahead and terrorize the countryside. So
Are they gangs?
Excuse me?
Are they gangs? Wild gangs, or are they organized by the military?
They are organized by the military. They are not wild gangs. But on the other hand,
go ahead.
That most of them are like Aristide supporters, and they are not out exclaiming that they are, because that they are under the protection of, what I'm trying to say is that they're doing this because not most of them, some of them are afraid for their lives. So some of the FRAP people, they are not holding like a political position. They are not saying, well, I am for Aristide or I am for Cédras. They are in it basically either for the money or for the fame that they are getting. So as you can see, once they get, they're not getting funding for them to do whatever they are doing, they will stop. Perhaps you want to take...
Just say briefly what the attaché is, or you're going to answer that.
The attachés?
Yeah.
Well, the attaches are a little bit more
Organized.
yes, a little bit more organized, a little bit more formal, if you will. They are the latest version of the paramilitary squad, which has always been present in the political and military apparatus of Haiti. And so I think the difference is that the FRAP is really, you know, thuggery. We saw them in operation and they behave like that, whereas the attaches tend to be a little bit, they have more institutional linkages and control. On your second question, how can we, or how is it possible for the military, you know, to get the military out, to get the surrender?
Given the level of arms.
Given the level of arms, and one report we had told us that there was 50,000 armed civilians in Port-au-Prince, which someone else said is a total exaggeration, you see. Anyway, the point is that they're very armed. And that is the source of the problem. First of all, I think the reason that they are armed is because in 1986, following the with removal of Jean-Claude Duvalier, one of the largest military assistance packages from the United States went to Haiti after '86. And secondly, that in the last few years, the military have been supporting themselves through a lot of drug trade. They get their arms and ammunition from their involvement in drugs. And I think thirdly, their surrender is difficult because of the existence of what I think is dual government on the issue of Haiti. So that there may be, it's a situation, I think, where the Haitian military believes that they have certain sections of the U.S. government by the tail. Because they are allowed, the Haitian military has been allowed to do all these wrongdoings, including the drug trade. And therefore, unless they become another kind of Noriega, you know, a bad boys on the run, that they believe that the U.S. will not really come for them.
Well, part of the problem is the complicity of the U.S. government with the particular segments of the Haitian government. Right. So if you give the signals that we're not really interested, because one of the most disturbing reports to come out was a report last week where there was the direct involvement with the U.S. government with about 47 members of the armed forces. Right. So what one has is not only dual signals, I think it's dual policy.
Yeah.
And what the question, given the strength of the Haitian military, the question becomes, what do we do? What does the U.S. do? Not only to support pro-democracy forces, but to give the signals in clear and concise terms that we will do something. The most unfortunate thing the United States government has not done is when it went in with a clear international mandate 2 weeks ago to land a certain amount of people by international fiat, it simply turned its back away and said they were scared of a few thugs who came up at the docks. Obviously, am I off? Obviously what is happening is that why Mr. Aris has not been allowed to go back to Haiti is because the U.S. government has taken the position it is not in their interest to have him go back. If it were in their interest, they would not be putting out the kinds of reports, first of all, to defame him. Suddenly he is unstable. Suddenly he has problems. One says, well, we didn't quite say that, you know. And then one says, well, Aristide said, I don't believe it. That's sorry, Aristide Clinton says, well, you know, I don't believe it. Who is really running the government? And what really is our policy? What I think we ought to be doing at this end is to try to say and get a very clear lines, meaning the Boston Globe, meaning the Harvard Review, meaning the New York Times, what is U.S. policy and how do we intend to implement our policy towards the restoration of democratic rule in Haiti, and how do we honor accords which we brokered at the Governor's Island? So I think what the problem really is that the U.S. is in complicity with the military, and as long as the U.S. government is in complicity with the military, there will be no restoration of Aristide. That's my position. Tom wants to say something.
Shirley.
Oh, so sorry. I said,
No, Tom.
Tom, why don't you simply go ahead?
I'm Tom Reeves of Roxbury Community College. I was on the delegation, and I want to speak to 2 points that have just been mentioned. many people think, well, maybe the CIA was once involved in killing men. What we found out in Haiti, we saw firsthand the ongoing involvement of certain levels of the U.S. government with Cedros and Francois. We saw that inside the U.S. Embassy. After having the assurance of the ambassador that he was unequivocally behind Aristide and had just been over to see Malval, we spoke to the DEA officer, the Drug Enforcement Administration officer, who admitted to us that he was in daily contact with the police and Cedros, and he was still giving them material support because they were still working together to get small caches of drugs that they were finding. We asked him why he was giving information to the military and police in light of all the proof that the police and military were involved in drugs themselves. He said, well, you know, we always have to work with known drug dealers. We always work with this kind of people. And he said, after all, there's no recognized government on the island of Haiti. We had been told by the ambassador that he recognized the Malval government. We asked him why he wasn't working with the Malval government. So we saw that at first hand, the proof that it's continuing, this double level. Secondly, as was mentioned before, we ran into this group of U.S. consultants from the Heritage Foundation and from Oliver North's Foundation, who admitted to us, and Kevin Katke gave me his card and boasted about the fact he had dinner with Cedros the night before. He also pulled out this business about the poor children of Haiti, and that we were helping Cedros through the Dominican Republic get support, get oil, that would then be able to run these trucks that could deliver food to these poor children, and weren't we disturbed about the children of Haiti. This is the extreme right wing under Oliver North. This is still the U.S. government, still supporting Cedros and Francois. So I think that is what we in the United States must expose. And we must continue to expose that along with a disinformation campaign that is widespread and that generates articles like this absurd Harvard study about the impact of the embargo on the poor children of Haiti. The poor children of Haiti are dying, but it has nothing to do with the embargo as far as I can see. It has to do with the incredible barbarism of the police and the military. We saw them refuse to allow any services whatsoever into the poor neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince. They are the ones that are killing the children of Haiti, not the embargo.
Let's continue the dialogue by asking this young lady to state a question.
Hi, I have two questions. First for Ms. Williams and then for Mr. Hammack. First, Ms. Williams, you mentioned the non-militaristic intervention on the part of the United States, and I wanted to know if you could possibly clarify on that, especially given the fact that the prior military occupation of the U.S. was disastrous, to say the least. And my second question to Mr. Hammack is, you talked about the embargo does have an impact on the poor, but given the fact that it kind of contradicts what Ms. David was saying, I was wondering if you could possibly clarify on how the economic embargo hurts the poor, who tend to be a little bit more depend on their own self-sufficiency in the first place.
The United States has always used military intervention to secure political ends throughout the hemisphere. That's long before, that's not new. That's even before the rise of communism, when intervention was advertised as being a way to stem communism. Now that communism has collapsed in Europe, that's not being used as a pretext for intervention, but there are new definitions that intervention is for humanitarian reasons and intervention is at the request of governments. Now, the Caribbean region has had a long history with intervention, and that for every Caribbean citizen, every national, is a sore point. I don't understand where it is these constituencies of pro-intervention are coming from. And I must say that I'm quite disturbed that Jesse Jackson and Trans-Africa and people like that are going around calling for military intervention. It obviously means we haven't done our homework, Selwyn, because this is the same Jesse Jackson who was supporting the U.S. intervention in Panama, 1990. So I want to say, if any one of you have contacts with the kindly gentleman, please tell them, and I will call his wife Jackie, who is a friend of mine, that they are wrong. They are dead wrong. Why? Because military intervention on the part of the United States has never been undertaken in the interest of democratic change in the interests of Caribbean people. I know you're revving to go.
No, I'm just simply saying I think the question is what is the nature of non-military intervention?
Yes, no, I want to lay that out. I really do, because I think that point needs to be clarified. You see, the way to get the collapse of the military and to get Haiti back on the path that it chose by a democratic election 2 years ago is, first of all, for the U.S. to pull out of Haiti. Not go in, to pull out its military support, to stop its duplicity, to be straight up on the side of President Aristide's democratic success through the Lavalas movement. So I see the exact opposite. Instead of an intervention and a military one, it's a withdrawal. It's a withdrawal. You heard what Shirley said, and I think that assessment is very well established. That if the leadership of the army is removed, because they really serve the CIA and foreign interests as opposed to the interests of the Haitian public as a large, if they're removed, that apparatus crumbles. That's what's necessary. Not to go in to take them out. Not to go in to rearrange society, because I want us to be very clear that military intervention is another tool for political control.
Before you do, John has to answer the second question, then we certainly have you.
Yeah, let me try to say a little bit more about the embargo. But let me first say something. I was actually shocked, that's a mild word, the other day when the Harvard study came out on the impact of the embargo on the poor. When I was in Haiti, I was told by the head of AID that they had data going back for 2 years showing that the embargo did not have any meaningful impact on the poor. So when I read this in the New York Times, I called them up.
The New York Times is all places, right?
Yeah. So I called up the head of AID and I said, hey, what's going on here? And so he faxed me up 2 things. First, the AID data, which does show very clearly that their data, that the embargo has had almost no impact on the poor. And second of all, he faxed me up the first draft of the Harvard study, which said very clearly in black and white that the sanctions did not have an impact on the embargo. Now, something happened to that draft between the first draft and the last draft, and I'm not sure what.
Any speculation?
But I was very concerned.
Any speculation
About that. And let me secondly say that clearly the only reason I mentioned that people will suffer with the embargo, the people in the rural areas will suffer little, actually, I think, because the people in the rural areas are survivors, and they're under a constant embargo anyway. They've been living under an embargo for years, and so they're not going to be affected very much. The thing I was absolutely struck by with the AID data is that they have data which shows that over the last 2 years, Port-au-Prince, which is where people think the embargo would have some problems because the food won't be able to come in, they have data showing that in fact food is getting into Port-au-Prince on the backs of people and by whatever means other than vehicles. However, I think that if we were to move to a full commercial embargo of Haiti, that there would be an impact on the lack of food being available after some time, depending on how long this commercial embargo lasted. And that's why I was saying you would need, in order to counter that, to have humanitarian aid delivered to certain poor areas of particularly in Port-au-Prince. Now let me also categorically state, however, and this is where Oxfam has a very big difference with other organizations who are at this point getting on television and saying, poor are starving because of the embargo, we need to change the embargo, and they're looking at the very short term. Our position is that this is a political issue. We need to look at the longer term, that the idea of breaking the embargo just to help poor people in the short term is short-sighted, and that we have to have the kind of analysis we've had here today in order for groups like Oxfam and hopefully other groups that are on TV, a lot more than we are, however, are out there saying the embargo is hurting the poor, implying, therefore, we should abolish the embargo, and therefore implying support for the current government. And that is what I have a real problem with what's happening.
And was just one addendum to that is that the military has had good enough experience with embargoes. And
well, all of a sudden, the interesting thing, though, is that all of a sudden the military has discovered poor people in Haiti. I mean, for the first time.
So, yes, sir.
My name is Chris Mack, and I'm a businessman here in Harvard Square. I'd like to ask Professor Williams, I'm persuaded by the logic you just laid out about why the American military should withdraw, just having this discussion with my friend here, I'm curious as to what your response would be, and this is hypothetical admittedly, if that was done and a week later Mr. Malval was assassinated by the attachés or something. I mean, what, and I'm not saying that the military is the answer, but I mean, what's your response about increased oppression that may happen?
It's an important question. You're asking about the maintenance of security and sort of law and order in the country in the interim. First of all, you have to recognize that President Aristide governed Haiti for 7 months and has an apparatus, a whole government machinery, security, economists, media people, agriculturalists, who were functioning, who are running the country. And in those 7 months, this military and paramilitary squad that we see now, they were sidelined. The last 2 years, they have taken that time with good help to beef themselves up again. So I think in the first instance, that's why the first point of the report is that he must return, but he must return with full powers to organize and secure the country. And the Governor's Island Accord account for that. What they ask is that at least there'll be 15 days transition between the resignation or otherwise removal of these individuals and the return of the president. And in that time, he, as president of Haiti, can propose any series of measures, one being the request for international peacekeeping forces or CARICOM or Caribbean troops in the interim, or his own whatever he chooses to do. But he has the sovereign right as head of state and head of government to organize a security apparatus for the country, and that he has to be allowed to do. And I think it can be done. I don't think that that's an excuse for not removing.
There's a gentleman behind trying to get our attention. You, sir? Yes.
My name is Maxwell. I'm a visiting scholar at the Harvard Center for International Affairs, and picking up Professor Williams' perspective of a consistent American policy throughout the century and before of support for the oligarchy, any oligarchy, support for the military as the sword arm of the oligarchy, and intervention when necessary to maintain that status quo. What grounds can there be for expecting that Washington, while it is still stamping progressive Cuba into the dust, will possibly reverse its policy so far as supporting the oligarchy and the military in Haiti are concerned?
Yes, you've put your finger on the matter that has taken me the last 10 years to really contemplate, because it is the most intransient problem in U.S.-Caribbean relations for reasons of history, reasons of ongoing asymmetry, for reasons of, I think, bad intentions and so on. But I think the way that I've looked at it is the flaw in the system, and the thing that will actually unleash it is the way in which the United States democracy does or does not function. That is the essential factor. So that when we went to Haiti, I hate to put it in this way, but and I don't know that I speak for the entire delegation, but it seemed to me that the answers lay in Washington, not so much in Haiti, because you already have a split in the Haitian elites, those who are willing to go along with the new democratic programs and those who will not. And you really do have a broad democratic alliance. That's the victory that Aristide gave to that country, which Malval captured so well. So I think the problem as I see it is the need to really have history understood in this society, to have democracy function in such a way that U.S. citizens can really understand the way in which they are, and I'm going to be very blunt, in which they are lied to or information hidden from. And this is another moment in U.S.-Caribbean relations when I certainly call upon the U.S. public, its scholars, its journalists, its voters, to demand that the things you say you believe in, like social justice, be applied in the public policy externally. Thank you.
Okay.
I think you were explaining how...
Could you please say who you are?
Sorry, yeah, I'm a student here at the...
Name, please,
school.
sir?
My name is Ted Paris. You were explaining pretty well how it is possible that there be a dual policy, or a dual policy could exist without there really being knowledge of it by the greater public. I'm wondering, could you explain why, or what would be the motivation for opposing, or for supporting Aristide, or for supporting Cedras and opposing Aristide? Why are the people that you said are down there in Haiti there pursuing anti-democratic measures or activities?
Well, may I ask the professor who's just spoken to take you under his wing? I think you need Harvard needs a good course in, U.S. Caribbean political relations and history.
But not that.
I want to answer that. I don't want to be facetious.
I'm saying that these are not necessarily contradictory impulses. That contradictions lay ingrained within public policies. The question is whose interests do these people serve, and what is to be gained? Obviously, various interests are served, and to the degree that the interests are served of those who are in power and the elite, and the amount of drugs that go through there, and the kinds of connections that places like the Heritage Foundation would have, it's in their interest to do that.
Let me give you three hypotheses, if you will, and some. One is, let's take the most outrageous, something that could never happen, that drug money, big time, $200 million, $300 million, pass through Haiti and find their way into U.S. banks and keep the U.S. economy more or less afloat. That's one hypothesis you hear in the streets. And let me give you a second one, that in fact, the 300 U.S. corporations doing business in Haiti drain that country of its resources to the extent that you end up with what the allies then call the basket case, and that these are the corporations who maintain politicians in high places in this country. These are just hypotheses. Let me give you a third one, that in fact there is a tremendous amount of racism and duplicity in U.S. policy between, say, Europe and what's often called the third world. That is to say, as one president said at the turn of the century, and I quote, how can we in the United States accept niggers speaking French? Right? That kind of attitude, as one congressman told me a few years ago, it's really hard to believe. I was interviewing in Congress for my paper on U.S. Caribbean relations. It's really hard to believe that these small sugar islands could be independent and could be in the United Nations voting with us. But he looked at me, he told me that.
Yes, let me add one other point, because I think sometimes I'll add a fourth one, and that is that if you look at the history of Latin America, and not just the Caribbean, but Latin America and the United States over the last 25 years anyway, I think that primarily the U.S. military and the U.S. CIA has had a very close relationship with the militaries and has helped to build up, ever since the Cuban Revolution, has helped to build the militaries in these countries. I was in the Defense Department 2 months ago with a very high-level Clinton administration, and his concern was how are we going to demilitarize the military in Latin America, which we helped to build up. So they're now thinking, well, we'll get them into humanitarian issues, which I'm very dreading and concerned about. But I think there's a very basic level where people from the CIA and the State and the Defense Department don't agree with the policy of the State Department and a president who they think will probably be in power for 3 more years. And then after that, they still have to run Latin America. And I think there's a real basic, militaries relate to militaries, and I think that they're very worried about not having that kind of military-to-military relationship in a different kind of government. And I think there's a lot of that in Latin America, and I think that there's very close relationships between our Defense Department with people on the payroll in these militaries in Latin America on our payroll. And I think it's a fact. That just came out in Haiti a week ago, but I'm sure it's true in almost every Latin country.
We've just been joined by Raymond Dooley, and he wishes at this point to say a few words.
Yeah, just in response to that question, I think it's important to remember that U.S. foreign policy, not just the policy of the military and the policy of the CIA, but U.S. foreign policy generally towards the Third World, and certainly in Latin America, has been focused entirely on not allowing socialist movements to develop, and certainly preventing any communist movements from developing. And everything is framed in those terms, and so support for military dictatorships, support for juntas, support for the worst kinds of oppression have been justified from one administration to the next for many, many years. It does stand, of course, in contradiction to the stated aims of U.S. foreign policy, which are framed principally in terms of supporting democracy, and certainly supporting electoral democracy. I mean, I think if nothing else, U.S. foreign policy is supposed to support elections. In this case, you have the unusual circumstance where an election actually did occur, and two-thirds of the people supported Aristide, and clearly his program, even if it's not entirely defined, but his program is a left-leaning program at the very least, and he's talked about redistribution of wealth, and he's not proclaimed himself to be a socialist, but he's certainly a social democrat, and social democrats have been viewed as being very threatening forces by most elements of the American foreign policy establishment for many, many years. The second point I wanted to make in relation to and this may have already come up earlier, but in terms of the dual policy and how one is in the White House right now extricates oneself from this problem, I think it's important that the people in the CIA and the Pentagon who have had the relationships with Cedras et al. In the past be identified, not to expose them, but to force them to make public their support for U.S. foreign policy. Mm-hmm. If they fail to do so, they should be dismissed from their positions in government. I think that would send a very strong message to the coup leaders and let them know in no uncertain terms that they can't just hang in there and assume that this moment is an ephemeral one and they can depend upon renewing their support, renewing their relationship with people who have been their paymasters in the past. I think that's what they're hoping will take place.
We're coming to the end, and I'm identifying about two persons, so why don't we simply have the questions here by this woman, and then your question, and then perhaps we could have the answers there.
I'm Rita Delia Casco from Nicaragua, and I'm a student here. More than a question, actually, I wanted to make a comment about this, the relationship between the U.S. establishment and the militaries in Latin America. I think the only country in Latin America where we succeeded actually overthrowing the military regime is Nicaragua, and where today you see that U.S. policy is primarily aimed at undermining the government by trying to force the current president to resign her Minister of Defense, not even the minister, but the top of the military head, the head of the military, which is a new military force. It's not the military force that was trained by the School of the Americas. But the United States government has now suspended all aid to Nicaragua because the government has refused to resign the head of the military. So you can see that it's really a very dual relationship. And I just wanted to make this comment because I came here because I could not understand really what was going on. And I have really learned nothing. I know everything. I've seen the same people moving, you know, with this dual policy. We had it in Nicaragua for many years. We have had it in Nicaragua for many years. You are the country where the United States has intervened most, you know, in this century. So it's really, I totally agree with what you have said.
Thank you.
Decima, who I know for many years, and the rest of you.
Yes, sir.
My name's Joshua Bloodworth. I'm a freshman here. And at the risk of sounding ignorant, I want to know exactly who the military is, I guess, terrorizing. And why I asked this question is because it seems really weird that you'd have this military regime in power, but at the same time have the prime minister willing to speak out and say that he's for democracy, have people that if you could find out where they're meeting, his government, I'm sure they know too. So how do these people feel safe enough to meet knowing this reign of power? So who are the military actually attacking and killing and brutalizing?
Okay, John.
Now let's Shirley.
Oh, sorry, Shirley.
The military is, they're attacking anyone who is pro-Aristide. We had a lot of people who are posting Aristide posters up on the walls, and they would, they're the ones who are most likely to be hurt. And also, many of the resistance groups that are helping the peasants mobilize, they're the ones that are being targeted the most. When we were in Haiti, we met with a lot of resistance group, and they have to do most of their work in hiding because of that. They can't go out and give not just, pro-Aristide, but any information about what is your rights as, Haitian citizens. They can't even do that because the military wants to suppress the people. Anything that has to do with your rights as a farmer, your rights as a human being, your rights as a woman. I mean, the stories that I hear about women, if I get raped in Haiti, I cannot take my case anywhere. I could just forget it. So as far as information like that, that is what they're trying to suppress. Basically, it's not just who is pro-Aristide or who is anti-Aristide. It's just democracy in general.
I can add something
Okay.
to that if you want. I'll just add something to that. Let me make it very clear that when we spoke to people from the popular sector, in other words, when we spoke to these representatives of different organizations, this was not done in a public place. This was not, we didn't say, let's go meet at McDonald's. This was done in a private home. They took tremendous risks. It was done underground. It wasn't done out in the light of day. These people took tremendous risks to come and talk to us, but they thought it was very important to come and talk to us. And the reason they talked to us is that a number of organizations, Oxfam being one, Grassroots International being another, have had long-term relationships with these people. And also our co-host over here from the MPP was part of that organization. And therefore they agreed to meet with us because there was trust. If there hadn't been any trust, these people could have been killed just for meeting with us, okay? And now the groups that they represent are groups that, like the Popular Peasant Movement, in Haiti, groups that have in fact organized, were very open and they've been working for many years, organized openly during the Aristide government, but have now gone underground. And there are these organizations in place in Haiti, but they are now underground, and in fact, those are the people who are getting caught in part. If they get found out, they get pulled out of their house, they get shot, they get killed.
In fact, when we arrived, we had difficulty getting transportation, as you know, because of the embargo on fuel and so on. In addition to that, bus drivers or taxi drivers, jitney drivers who were receiving foreign delegations and driving them around were very unwilling to do that because the day that we arrived, one fellow had been beaten up. I'm not sure which delegation he was driving. There was another group, the National Lawyers Guild and so on. So that we had to take great precaution with our bus drivers, where they would wait, that they wouldn't be seen alone, that they wouldn't go home after dark, to protect them because they were seen as part of the facilitating apparatus for democracy. So it's anybody who organizes or anybody who speaks out who has an alternative. I mean, I have seen grown intellectuals, people who were here, they're now in Haiti, in terror until they get behind the huge gates. And then the continent actually changes.
Yeah. I thought I'd make some closing comments, but since I think it's better to have each panelist just speak 1 minute, sort of re-emphasize what you think you want to leave the audience with, and then perhaps we could just simply thank you all for coming. But why don't we begin with Shirley?
I want to add, working with Haiti Communication Project, we try very hard to correct the misinformation. And one of the things which I want, especially the American community, to understand is, or to at least to question what is being printed in newspaper. One was, the question of whether Aristide is, mentally unstable. Don't accept these facts as the truth. If President Aristide won by 67% of the vote, I don't think any president in the United States ever won by a landslide like that. Obviously, we would not have elected a leader who is crazy. And then second is, we get, congressmen like Senator Dole and Senator Helm. Congressman Dole has a sugar plantation in Dominican Republic. Obviously, he is not one who's going to want democracy in Haiti. He wants to keep the people of Haiti in oppression so they could cross the border and then work into, slave-like conditions. And the third is, with the Harvard report, people saying, well, of course, America is very, when we talk about children, everyone is, willing to give help. And so now they're trying to find, key issues as to stop what we're trying to do. And the embargo right now is we're asking for a full commercial embargo so that it will be very quickly so we could get democracy restored in Haiti. Under President Bush, the embargo lasted for 2 years. It did not do anything. Most of the elites, they were traveling from Miami to New York and getting their resources. We do want full commercial embargo so that these people will be forced to stay in Haiti and to really, start understanding as how they are deterring Haiti. I mean, with the pictures that we have here, you could see how the trash, the pollution, everything is piling up in Haiti. It's not even a question of, restoring our president back. It's a question of getting Haiti functioning, and that's with my closing remark.
Raymond Dooley.
Several points. Some of them may have been made earlier, but I'm blissfully unaware of that, having not been here.
Repetition doesn't hurt, really.
Right. I mean, the so-called government that's in operation in Haiti right now is not a government in any real sense of the word. They don't run any services. They don't provide anything to the people. They don't administer the city of Port-au-Prince. They rule by terror. They rule by driving through the streets at night throughout all the districts of the city, shooting off their automatic weapons to scare people, and also to kill some people. How many? We don't know. We know that photographers would go out at dawn to drive the streets to find evidence of what happened the night before, but only anecdotally can those numbers be compiled. And on the countryside, it's even more difficult because the stories that we heard were stories of people being beaten and killed and dumped in rivers, and only through anecdote and through oral discussion can one determine just what level of violence is occurring. But it is a gang essentially of extortionists who are running the country right now. I think the leadership has one foot out the door. I think they can be forced the rest of the way if it's made clear that the United States government is speaking with one voice. And I think it's important for people in the United States to call upon their elected officials to ensure that those in the CIA and those in the State Department understand that they're obliged by law to follow whatever U.S. foreign policy is. And right now, the stated foreign policy of our country is to restore President Aristide. We need to hold the president and the government accountable and ensure that they continue to enforce that stated policy. And one last comment about people that we met with. The Aristide government, that is the government that he appointed under the terms of the Governor's Island Accord, is attempting to function, is meeting in Prime Minister Robert Malval's house. I can't tell you what, they are meeting in a condition of total lack of safety. And they understand that. One of their number, their Attorney General, was assassinated just weeks ago on the street. When we met with one of the ministers, he mentioned to us that an individual who was working as a deputy to one of the other cabinet members, who was clearly a friend of his, had disappeared that day. These are people who are acting at great risk to their own lives. I mean, common decency compels people who can live in the safety of, say, the American democracy to stand in solidarity with them and to do everything we can to support them.
I'm positive Shirley forgot to make one point.
I just want to add to what Ray said is that General Sendoas and Michel Francois, they have their families outside of Haiti. They've gotten their wives and their children living in the Dominican Republic, so I just want to clearly state that they are just waiting for an order as to get out of Haiti. So as you can see why they have no interest in Haiti as of now. That was it.
John?
Yeah, just a couple of final comments. First is that we can make a difference. And the way that I think we can make a difference is that we have to get involved. I never thought that 16 of us going down to Haiti would make a difference, and yet we have made a difference. We got on an airplane and went when everybody told us we couldn't go because it was too unsafe, and we were all going to get killed. And yet we went, we had a prayer service, we've come back, I've been in Washington last week, I talked to people in the White House, in the State Department, in Congress, to bring about this message. So we can get involved, and I urge all of you to get involved with the Haitian Communications Project, get involved with Oxfam, get involved with whatever you can in terms of keeping this issue of pro-democracy alive. I'm very concerned about Haiti right now. And the only way the government is going to change or hold itself to the policy it's set and change its dual policy is if, in fact, they hear from us. It's not going to happen if we leave it just to politicians. And the way to do that is, as Ray mentioned, you write You talk, you call your congressman, and you get involved with groups that are involved in Haiti. We have President Aristide. We think he's invited to a hunger banquet of ours next Thursday in Washington. Again, we're having a hunger banquet here in Boston. And little things that people can do to get involved in the issues of pro-democracy and long-term development are absolutely crucial. And let me also, one last comment, which is something I said in my statement. If Aristide goes back, that's not the end, okay? That is the beginning. And that is when, in fact, we will have to invest in Haiti. Because if Aristide goes back and he's only there for a month and then he leaves, the world will come to an end for the Haitian poor. And so if Aristide does go back, that's the time that we need to say, okay, now we need to invest to get poor people to the table in Haiti to help make decisions. Thank you.
Decima.
I want to introduce another member of the delegation who's joined us, Mack Sek, who is a Senegalese living here in Boston, teaches at Boston University, and the representative of Trans-Africa who traveled with us, Mack. Thank you. In closing, I want to reiterate what has been stated so eloquently by my colleagues, that in fact we can make a difference, a few of us, and the more we are, the more difference we can make. The sister from Nicaragua, myself from Grenada, those of us from Haiti, those of us from other parts of the world, we know the value of international solidarity. It's a very strong and important, I don't want to use a military term, but it is a tool. It's a very strong element in the search for improved conditions, both political, social, and economic. So that's my first appeal. My second is to urge you to pay attention to the report, which will be issued on Monday. We don't know how and when, but I suspect Haiti Communications Project will be the place to get it. The telephone number is 542-1013. 542-1013. And I'd like, therefore, to close by summarizing our central findings, because they are very important to us, and we gave a vow that we would take them to the public when we came back. First of all, that President Aristide has the broad continuing support of the Lavalas movement, a movement that is that spans a spectrum from grassroots, left, activist organizers, right through to the business community, and that they want his return, they want it soon. We saw a number of anxieties developing. People are wondering if really they should hold out hope, or what should they do. So we encourage citizens in the United States to believe in the need and to support the need for the return of President Aristide with his full presidential authority and with as much economic assistance as the U.S. private institutions and government organizations will be willing to give him. Secondly, we want to deplore the political and economic conditions for the majority of Haitians. You know that the average industrial worker in Haiti makes 54 cents an hour. It is appalling. I don't know that NAFTA is going to be the answer to that, by the way. But it is quite important to know that politics and economics are linked, and that the conditions there, when Haitians flee Haiti, they're not just fleeing because they need bread, they're fleeing because they need bread and roses. And that it is important then to note that and have the social progress of that country as the foundation for our political support. Our third position, our third finding, is that the United States must speak in one democratic voice, and its policy must be consistent with what the president has been saying, that there is no support for the putsch and the right wing and the military, and that there is every support for the restoration of that process there. Our fourth position is that the United Nations is not sufficiently an actor. And that's something, I suppose, for us to contemplate and to find out how that can be strengthened, how that institution can be strengthened. Our fifth finding is that Prime Minister Malval stands behind the restoration process and is very active. And to this young man who asked, what's going on, you have two governments in operation in Haiti. I think that's the point you're missing, that there's the military and then there's the civilian government that is under the prime ministership of of Malval, and they are functioning under tremendous adversity, but managing to keep together a coherent government apparatus, and they need our support, and we need to write about them and to lift them up and to show the fact that under adversity they continue to function and prepare the way for this restoration. And our sixth finding, very important one, is that the people of Haiti, particularly the organizations, are alive and well despite the adversity. I mean, I can't say that they're doing very well, but they're alive and they're hoping. They have programs in place. Some of them have resources, others want resources, but by and large, the grassroots pro-democracy movement is an important place for us to look and to use that vision to respond to the often stated notion that Haiti is a basket case. Haiti could not be a basket case if it could produce a movement as it has in a prime minister and a president such as Aristide.
I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank all of the panelists, Shirley, Raymond, John, Decima, for their comments and for the courage which they took in going to Haiti. Certainly we can make a difference. Certainly supporting Aristide is but the beginning, not an end. And we could not really end this forum without asking Tom Reeves, who's done so much, so often, to stand up, take a bow, and let's really applaud him for the kind of work he's really been doing. Tom, would you please stand? He has been a one-man international team in terms of keeping our focus on this issue. Again, I thank you for coming. I thank you for your patience. While you have heard a lot of things reiterated, I think we've all learned a whole lot from this forum. And again, it's our pleasure. Let's keep the struggle going. Let's keep on keeping on. Thank you so very much.
Thank you also very much.
Thank you for coming. Well done. I mean, I think this kind of tongue meeting discussions need to be gotten at all the schools.
We should do something. I think
put
so.
it out. Put it out there because.
We should probably do
Hello,
that.
how are you?
Thank you, John.
Excuse me? Maxie?
Thank you.
Oh, yes, you called me. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Nice. Come on.
That'd be fun. That'd be good.
Okay, so let me know where to find you. Not that I'm going to call you soon.
With
Hi, Carlos. Good to see you.
Parliament.
We need to.